You know how people always say, my best friend stole my fiancé? Like it's some kind of twisted fairy tale? Well, buckle up, because I actually married her dad and became her stepmom, and honey, that's just the beginning of this absolute shit show. Let me paint you a picture of how spectacularly my life imploded on what was supposed to be the happiest day of my planning period. Not my wedding day, mind you. That never happened. I'm talking about the day I walked into David's apartment with surprise takeout from his favorite Thai place, keys jingling in my hand like some kind of demented dinner bell announcing my arrival to the worst fucking surprise party of my life. The smell hit me first. That sickeningly sweet vanilla perfume that Cassie, my best friend since we were 12, my maid of honor, my supposed ride or die, had been wearing since high school. My brain did this weird thing where it tried to rationalize it away. Maybe she'd stopped by to help David with wedding planning. Maybe she'd spilled some of her perfume on his couch during one of our group hangouts. But then I heard it. The sound of my fiancé's voice, low and breathy, saying her name like a prayer. Like he'd never said my name. Like I was some stranger who'd wandered into someone else's love story. My hands went numb. The Thai food containers slipped from my fingers and hit the hardwood floor with this wet, splattering sound that seemed to echo in my chest. Pad Thai noodles spread across the floor like some kind of prophetic mess, and I remember thinking, stupidly, that David was going to be pissed about the stain on his precious floors. That's when the voices got clearer. She was talking about how she'd always wondered what it would be like, how she'd thought about it since my engagement party 6 months ago, how she couldn't stop thinking about him, about us, about how wrong it all felt that I was the one wearing his ring. And David, sweet, loyal David who'd proposed to me on a beach in Cabo, who'd held me through my dad's funeral, who'd promised me forever with tears in his eyes, was telling her how he'd felt the same way, how he'd been fighting it, how he couldn't fight it anymore. I stood there in that hallway, takeout sauce seeping into my shoes, and felt something fundamental crack inside my chest. Not break, crack. Like a windshield that's been hit by a rock but hasn't shattered yet. You know it's going to happen, but for now you can still see through it if you squint. The rational part of my brain was screaming at me to leave, to turn around, walk out, and pretend this never happened. But my feet had apparently decided they were done taking orders from my brain, because instead of backing away, I found myself creeping closer to David's bedroom door. It was cracked open just enough. Just enough to see Cassie's red hair, the same red hair I'd braided 1,000 times during sleepovers, the same red hair I'd helped her curl for prom, spilled across David's pillows. The same pillows where I'd planned our honeymoon, where we'd talked about baby names, where I'd fallen asleep feeling safe and loved and stupid. My engagement ring felt like it was burning a hole through my finger. The diamond David had saved for 8 months to buy, the one Cassie had helped him pick out, the one she'd squealed over and called perfect, while slipping it on her own finger to see how it looked. She'd known. She'd fucking known exactly how it looked because she'd been planning this. The crack in my chest spread wider. I wanted to scream. I wanted to burst through that door and tear her hair out and throw my ring in David's face. I wanted to set his apartment on fire and dance in the ashes while eating the Thai food off the floor like some kind of deranged victory feast. Instead, I stood there and watched my entire life rearrange itself around this new, horrible reality. They were still talking, and every word was another hairline fracture in whatever was left of my heart. Cassie was crying, actually crying about how guilty she felt, about how she never wanted to hurt me, about how she'd tried to stop herself but couldn't. David was comforting her, telling her it wasn't her fault, that sometimes these things just happen, that what they had was real, and what he and I had was comfortable. 6 years of my life, and I was comfortable. I thought about every time she'd hugged him a little too long at parties, every time she'd laughed at his jokes like they were the funniest things she'd ever heard, every time she'd asked me about our sex life with this weird, hungry look in her eyes, every time she'd insisted on helping with wedding planning, on being involved in every single detail. She hadn't been helping me plan my wedding. She'd been planning her own. My phone buzzed in my pocket and I nearly jumped out of my skin. A text from my mom asking if I wanted to come over for dinner tomorrow to discuss final wedding preparations. Wedding preparations for a wedding that was apparently not going to happen. Wedding preparations for a marriage that had been sabotaged by the two people I trusted most in the world. The crack in my chest reached my throat. I backed away from the door on shaking legs, leaving the Thai food massacre behind like evidence of a crime scene. My hands were trembling so hard I could barely get my keys out of my purse. Every sound seemed amplified: the rustle of my jacket, the click of my heels on the hardwood, the whispered conversation still flowing from the bedroom like poison. I made it to my car before the adrenaline wore off and the reality really hit me. They were in love. They were planning to be together. And I was the obstacle that needed to be removed. I sat in my car outside David's building, staring at my engagement ring like it was some kind of foreign object. The diamond caught the afternoon light and threw little rainbows across my lap, and I thought about how Cassie had always said it was the most beautiful ring she'd ever seen, how she'd tried it on just for fun, at least a dozen times, how she'd taken pictures of her hand wearing it and posted them on social media with captions about someday. Someday had apparently arrived. My phone rang, and David's name flashed on the screen. I stared at it until it went to voicemail, then watched it ring again and again. He was probably panicking, wondering where I was, whether I'd seen the Thai food explosion in his hallway. The fourth time he called, I answered. His voice was carefully casual, like he was reading from a script, asking where I was, saying he'd found food spilled in his hallway and was worried something had happened to me. I told him I was fine, that I'd dropped the food and decided to go home instead of cleaning it up, that I was tired and needed some space. He bought it, or pretended to. Either way, he told me he loved me and that he'd see me tomorrow, and I said okay and hung up. Then I sat in my car and laughed until I cried. Because the man I was supposed to marry in 3 weeks had just looked me in the eye, over the phone, but still, and lied to me with the same mouth that had been on my best friend an hour ago. Because the woman who was supposed to stand beside me at my wedding had been systematically destroying my relationship for months, maybe years, because I was comfortable. I drove home to my apartment, the one I'd been planning to give up so David and I could move in together after the honeymoon, and sat on my couch staring at the wedding dress hanging in my closet. The dress Cassie had helped me pick out. The dress she'd cried over when I tried it on, saying I looked like a princess. She'd probably been imagining herself in it. The crack in my chest finally shattered completely, and I cried until my eyes were swollen shut and my throat was raw. I cried for the 6 years I'd wasted on David. I cried for the friendship I'd lost. I cried for the naive idiot I'd been, trusting them both completely while they plotted behind my back. But mostly, I cried because I had no idea what the hell I was supposed to do next. The wedding was in 3 weeks. The deposits were paid. The guests were invited. My parents had flown in from across the country. David's family had taken vacation time. Everyone was excited, everyone was happy, everyone was ready to celebrate the love story that had apparently been a lie for God knows how long. I was going to have to tell them, all of them. I was going to have to explain that the man I'd been with for 6 years had chosen my best friend over me. That I'd been so blind, so trusting, so fucking comfortable that I'd never seen it coming. The humiliation was almost worse than the heartbreak. I pulled off my engagement ring and set it on the coffee table, where it sat like an accusation. The indent it left on my finger was pale and obvious, like a scar that would take months to fade. My phone buzzed with a text from Cassie. "Hope you're having a good day. Can't wait to see you tomorrow for dress fittings." I stared at that message for a long time, at the heart emoji she'd added like we were still friends, like she hadn't just destroyed my life, like she wasn't planning to take everything I'd worked for and make it hers. That's when the first spark of something darker than sadness flickered to life in my chest. Because Cassie had made one very crucial mistake. She'd assumed I was going to roll over and take this. That I'd quietly cancel the wedding, slink away with my tail between my legs, and let her slide seamlessly into the life she'd stolen from me. But as I sat there in my apartment, surrounded by the ruins of my future, I realized something important. I wasn't actually the comfortable, predictable person they thought I was. I was pissed. And I was about to become very, very creative. The thing about betrayal is that it doesn't just break your heart, it rewires your entire fucking brain. I spent the next 3 days calling in sick to work, ordering way too much Chinese food, and sitting on my couch in the same pajamas like some kind of heartbreak hermit. But here's the kicker, I wasn't wallowing. I was thinking. And when I think, really think, I get dangerous. See, while David and Cassie were probably planning their grand confession speech, I was doing something they'd never expect from comfortable, predictable me. I was conducting reconnaissance. I went through every text message, every social media post, every shared memory with the precision of a forensic investigator. And holy shit, the evidence was everywhere once I knew what to look for. The Instagram post from my engagement party where Cassie's hand was resting on David's shoulder just a little too intimately. The way she'd insisted on being in every single wedding planning meeting. How she'd convinced me to push the wedding back 3 months because summer weddings are more romantic. How she'd volunteered to coordinate with all the vendors so I wouldn't have to stress about it. She'd been managing my wedding like a project manager, making sure every detail was perfect for when she stepped into my place. The realization hit me like a freight train made of pure rage. She hadn't just stolen my fiancé, she'd been choreographing my replacement for months. I made a list. Not a grocery list or a to-do list, but a comprehensive breakdown of every single thing Cassie had done to orchestrate this betrayal. The times she'd shown up at David's apartment when I was working late. The girls' nights she'd canceled at the last minute, claiming she had family stuff. The way she'd pumped me for information about our relationship problems, our sex life, our future plans. My hands were shaking as I wrote it all down, but not from sadness anymore, from pure crystalline fury. Because I realized that every single time I'd confided in her about relationship doubts, every time I'd told her about fights with David, every time I'd been vulnerable and honest with my best friend, she'd been collecting intelligence to use against me. The night I'd told her I was worried David was pulling away from me, she'd shown up at his apartment the next day with homemade cookies and a shoulder to cry on. The time I'd confessed that our sex life had gotten a little routine, she'd started dropping hints about how spontaneous and adventurous she was. The conversation where I'd admitted I wasn't sure I was ready for marriage. She'd probably run straight to David with that information, positioning herself as the more committed option. I felt sick, actually physically nauseous, because I'd been the architect of my own destruction, handing her the blueprints and the wrecking ball while she smiled and hugged me and told me she was happy for me. By day 4, I'd moved past the investigation phase and into planning mode. Because here's what David and Cassie didn't know about me. I don't just get mad, I get strategic. And I'd been underestimating myself for years, playing the role of the easygoing girlfriend who never caused problems. But comfortable doesn't mean weak. It just means I'd never had a reason to show my teeth before. I started with the basics. Called the wedding venue and asked about their cancellation policy. Called the caterer, the florist, the photographer, played the devastated bride-to-be, explaining that there had been a family emergency and we needed to postpone indefinitely. Most of them were surprisingly sympathetic, especially when I started crying, which wasn't hard since I was crying pretty much constantly anyway. But I didn't cancel everything. I kept the photographer, told him I might need his services for a different kind of event soon. I kept the florist on retainer, explaining that I might want to do something smaller and more intimate. I kept the venue for a different date, one that was 6 months out instead of 3 weeks, because an idea was forming. A beautiful, terrible, absolutely perfect idea. See, there was one crucial piece of information that David and Cassie didn't know I had. Something I'd learned completely by accident during one of our group dinners a few months ago. Cassie's parents had been talking about their upcoming divorce. Her mom was moving to Florida, her dad was staying in town, and Mr. Richardson, Robert, as he'd insisted I call him, had made this offhand comment about how he was looking forward to dating again. How he felt like he'd wasted his 30s being married to someone who didn't appreciate him. I'd been polite and supportive, the way you're supposed to be when someone's parents are splitting up. But I'd also noticed something else. Robert Richardson was a good-looking man, 52, recently divorced, successful architect, and, this was the important part, he'd always been especially friendly to me. Always made a point of asking about my work, my interests, my life. Always seemed genuinely interested in what I had to say. At the time, I'd thought he was just being a good future father-in-law. But now, sitting in my apartment surrounded by wedding planning debris and takeout containers, I started to wonder if maybe there had been something else there. Something I'd been too committed to David to notice. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found his number. I'd gotten it months ago when he'd offered to help with some construction work on my apartment. We'd texted back and forth a few times about contractors and paint colors, casual, friendly conversation. Nothing inappropriate, nothing that would have made David uncomfortable. But now I was looking at those messages with different eyes. Robert had been flirty. Subtle, respectful, but definitely flirty. He'd called me brilliant. when I'd suggested a creative solution for my kitchen renovation. He'd sent me pictures of architecture projects he thought I'd find interesting. He'd even made a joke about how David was a lucky guy to have someone with such good taste. I stared at his contact information for a long time, turning the phone over in my hands like it was a weapon I was deciding whether to use. Because what I was thinking about doing was nuclear. It was the kind of revenge that would detonate everything in a 50-mile radius, leaving nothing but scorched earth and psychological fallout. But the more I thought about it, the more perfect it became. Cassie wanted my life? She wanted my fiancé, my wedding, my future? Fine. She could have David. But she was going to have to live with the consequences of her choices. And one of those consequences was going to be calling me Mom. I started researching Robert Richardson like I was writing his biography. Social media deep dives, professional profiles, mutual friends who might have information. What I found was encouraging. He was handsome, successful, and according to several divorce support group posts I found, he was feeling pretty raw about his ex-wife's betrayal. Apparently, she'd been having an affair with her personal trainer for 2 years before she finally asked for a divorce. So Robert Richardson was recently divorced, emotionally vulnerable, and had been betrayed by someone he trusted, just like me. We had so much in common. I also discovered that he'd been posting a lot of philosophical stuff on Facebook lately. Quotes about new beginnings, about finding yourself after heartbreak, about the importance of authentic connections. Classic rebound behavior, but also an opening. A way to connect with him that would feel natural and organic. The plan started taking shape in my mind like a blueprint. I would reach out to Robert, ostensibly to talk about his divorce since I was dealing with my own relationship drama. I would be vulnerable, honest, available. I would let him comfort me, and I would comfort him. And then, when the time was right, I would become exactly what he needed. But I couldn't rush it. This had to be perfect. This had to be believable. Because if I was going to destroy Cassie's life as thoroughly as she'd destroyed mine, I needed to do it right. I spent the next week crafting the perfect text message to Robert. It had to be casual but meaningful, friendly but not too forward. I went through about 30 drafts before I settled on something that felt right. Hi, Robert. I hope you're doing well. I know this might seem random, but I've been thinking about what you said about starting over after a relationship ends. I'm going through something similar right now, and I wondered if you might want to grab coffee sometime. I could use some advice from someone who's been there. No pressure if you're not up for it. I just thought it might be nice to talk to someone who understands. Hope you're taking care of yourself. I stared at that message for about an hour before sending it, because once I hit send, there was no going back. I was committing to a path that would either be the most brilliant revenge in history or the most spectacular self-destruction. But you know what? I was done being comfortable. I was done being predictable. I was done being the person who took shit lying down. I hit send. He responded within 20 minutes. I'd love to get coffee. How about tomorrow afternoon? I know a quiet place where we can talk without interruption. And thank you for reaching out. It means more than you know. I read that message about 50 times, analyzing every word like it was a coded transmission. The fact that he'd suggested somewhere quiet, that he'd thanked me for reaching out, that he'd responded so quickly, it all suggested that maybe this wouldn't be as difficult as I'd thought. Because here's what I'd figured out about Robert Richardson during my research. He was lonely. His wife had left him for someone younger. His daughter was about to betray the person she claimed to love most, and he was starting over at 52. He needed someone who would appreciate him, someone who would see his worth, someone who would choose him first. I could be that person. I could be exactly what he needed, and in return, he could give me exactly what I needed, the ultimate revenge against the woman who'd tried to steal my life. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in weeks. I got dressed. Really dressed. Not just throwing on whatever clothes were closest, but actually putting effort into how I looked. I chose a dress that was sophisticated but not too formal, did my makeup carefully, styled my hair. I looked like a woman who had her shit together, even though inside I was still a hurricane of rage and heartbreak. I met Robert at a small cafe across town, somewhere David and Cassie would never think to look for me. He was already there when I arrived, standing up to hug me like we were old friends instead of people who'd only spent time together in group settings. And here's the thing that surprised me. He looked good. Really good. I'd always thought of him as Cassie's dad, but sitting across from him in that cafe, I realized he was just a man. An attractive, intelligent, emotionally available man who was looking at me like I was the most interesting person in the room. We talked for 3 hours. About his divorce, about my relationship problems. I was vague about the details but honest about the pain, about starting over, about learning to trust again. He was funny, thoughtful, genuinely interested in what I had to say. And the more we talked, the more I realized that this wasn't just about revenge anymore. Robert Richardson was actually a catch. He was everything David wasn't: attentive, mature, emotionally intelligent. He asked follow-up questions about my work, remembered details from our previous conversations, made me feel heard in a way I hadn't felt in months, maybe years. When he walked me to my car, he paused before saying goodbye, asked if I'd like to have dinner sometime, somewhere nicer than a coffee shop. Said he'd really enjoyed talking to me, that he'd felt more like himself in the past few hours than he had in months. I said yes, because by then, I wasn't just planning revenge anymore. I was planning a future where Cassie would have to watch her father fall in love with the woman she'd betrayed, where she'd have to smile and be polite while I became part of her family in a way she could never escape, where she'd have to call me Mom at every holiday, every birthday, every family gathering for the rest of her life. The best part? I was pretty sure I was going to enjoy it, because Robert Richardson was looking at me like I was precious, like I was someone worth choosing, like I was anything but comfortable, and Cassie had no idea what was coming. 6 weeks later, I was sitting in Robert Richardson's kitchen wearing his Columbia University sweatshirt and nothing else, watching him make me Eggs Benedict from scratch while he hummed some old jazz standard. And I'm not gonna lie, this wasn't just revenge anymore. This was me discovering that I'd been dating a fucking child for 6 years when I could have been with a man who knew how to make hollandaise sauce and give incredible head in the same morning. The irony wasn't lost on me. While David was probably still figuring out how to tell me he was in love with my best friend, I was falling for someone who actually deserved me. Someone who brought me flowers just because it was Tuesday. Someone who listened when I talked about my day instead of scrolling through his phone. Someone who made me feel like I was worth more than just comfortable. But don't get me wrong, the revenge element was still absolutely delicious. I'd been strategic about it. Robert and I had been seeing each other for 6 weeks, and I'd been careful not to let David or Cassie catch wind of anything. I'd told my parents I was taking some time to figure things out before the wedding, which bought me space to navigate the situation without having to explain why I was suddenly glowing and happy instead of stressed about wedding planning. The beautiful thing about dating your best friend's father is that you have insider information. I knew Cassie's schedule, her favorite restaurants, her social media habits. I knew exactly when and where she'd be most likely to see something that would destroy her world. Robert and I had been taking things slow. Well, slow for people who were both rebounding from major betrayals and had incredible chemistry. We'd gone on proper dates, had long conversations about our lives and goals, spent entire weekends together talking and laughing and discovering that we had way more in common than just our shared experience of being betrayed by people we trusted. He was brilliant, funny, kind, and, this part was important, completely unaware that his daughter was currently fucking my ex-fiancé. I'd been waiting for the right moment to tell him. Not because I wanted to be dishonest, but because I wanted to make sure our relationship was solid enough to survive the nuclear fallout that was coming. Because once Robert knew what Cassie had done, there was going to be family drama that would make the Real Housewives look like a meditation retreat. That moment came on a Sunday morning when we were reading the paper together in his bed, and his phone buzzed with a text from Cassie asking if he wanted to have lunch that week. She wanted to catch up and talk about some exciting news. I felt Robert tense beside me as he read the message. "She's been weird lately," he said, showing me the phone. "Secretive. Happy but guilty about it, if that makes sense. I think she's seeing someone new but doesn't want to tell me about it." And that's when I knew it was time. I turned to face him, taking a deep breath. "Robert, there's something I need to tell you about Cassie, and about why my engagement ended." The conversation that followed was one of the most difficult things I'd ever done. Not because I felt guilty. Fuck that. But because I had to watch this man I'd grown to care about discover that his daughter was capable of the same kind of betrayal he'd just survived with his ex-wife. I told him everything. The Thai food incident, the months of evidence I'd uncovered, the systematic way Cassie had dismantled my relationship while pretending to be my best friend. I showed him the texts, the social media posts, the timeline I'd constructed of her deception. Robert listened without interrupting, his face going through a series of emotions that I recognized from my own mirror 6 weeks ago. Shock, disbelief, anger, disappointment, and finally, a kind of resigned sadness that made my heart ache for him. "Jesus Christ," he said finally, running his hands through his hair. "I raised her better than this. I thought I raised her better than this." "It's not your fault," I said, meaning it. "Some people are just capable of things that the rest of us can't imagine." He was quiet for a long time, staring at the evidence I'd laid out like a prosecutor presenting a case. Then he looked at me with this expression that was part admiration, part concern. "What are you planning to do?" he asked. And that's when I told him about the wedding venue I'd kept on retainer, about the photographer, the florist, the officiant I'd contacted, about the plan that had been forming in my mind for weeks. "I want to marry you," I said simply. "Not just for revenge, though that's going to be fucking spectacular, but because I'm happier with you than I've ever been with anyone. Because you make me feel like I'm worth choosing first. Because I think we could actually be great together." Robert stared at me like I'd just proposed we rob a bank together. Which, in a way, I guess I had. "You want to marry me to get back at my daughter?" he said slowly. "No," I corrected him. "I want to marry you because I'm falling in love with you. The fact that it will make your daughter's life a living hell is just a bonus." He laughed then, this short, sharp sound that was part shock and part genuine amusement. "You're serious?" "Dead serious. I've got a venue, vendors, and a guest list that includes everyone who was supposed to come to my wedding to David. All I need is a groom who's ready to make a statement." "A statement?" he repeated. "The statement being that actions have consequences. That you can't destroy someone's life and expect them to just disappear quietly. That sometimes the person you screw over gets creative about screwing you back." Robert was quiet for a long time, processing what I'd just proposed. And I could see the moment when he made his decision, when something shifted in his eyes from shock to something that looked a lot like determination. "She's going to hate you," he said finally. "She already hates me," I pointed out. "She just hasn't admitted it to herself yet. But she will when she has to explain to everyone why she's sleeping with her stepmother's ex-fiancé. And David? David's going to have to live with the fact that he threw away 6 years with someone who would have been loyal to him for someone who was willing to betray her best friend. He'll figure out eventually that if she'll do it with him, she'll do it to him." Robert nodded slowly, then reached for his phone. "I need to call my lawyer." "Why?" "Because if I'm going to marry you, I want to make sure my assets are protected. Not from you," he added quickly, seeing my expression. "From the shitstorm that's about to rain down on all of us." We spent the next week planning the most beautifully vindictive wedding in history. I kept the same date I'd originally planned for my wedding to David, 3 weeks away. I kept the same venue, the same flowers, the same photographer. I even kept the same dress because fuck it, I looked amazing in it and I wasn't letting Cassie's betrayal rob me of that too. The guest list was where things got interesting. Everyone who'd been invited to my wedding to David was getting a new invitation. To my wedding to Robert Richardson. Same time, same place, completely different groom. The RSVP cards included a note explaining that there had been a change in circumstances and that I was excited to share my special day with someone who truly deserved my love. I hand-delivered Cassie's invitation. I'd been tracking her schedule, and I knew she'd be at her favorite coffee shop Tuesday morning, probably meeting David to plan their grand confession. I walked in wearing the engagement ring Robert had given me, a vintage Art Deco piece that was about 10 times more beautiful than the one David had chosen, and sat down at the table next to theirs. They were so wrapped up in each other that they didn't notice me at first. I got to listen to about 5 minutes of them planning how to break the news to me, how to minimize the damage, how to make it seem like it just happened, instead of something they'd been orchestrating for months. "She's going to be devastated," Cassie was saying, stirring her latte with this fake concerned expression. "But maybe it's for the best. I mean, she deserves someone who loves her completely, not someone who's just settling." Settling. That word again. "I feel terrible about the timing," David said. "But you're right. Better to end it now than to go through with a marriage that wouldn't have worked anyway." A marriage that wouldn't have worked anyway. I cleared my throat. They both turned around, and I got to watch their faces go through the same emotional journey Robert's had, except with a lot more panic and a lot less dignity. "Hi guys," I said cheerfully, standing up and walking over to their table. "Mind if I join you? I have something exciting to share." Cassie's face had gone completely white. David looked like he was about to throw up on his laptop. "Elena," Cassie started, but I held up my hand. "Before you say anything, I have an announcement to make." I pulled out the wedding invitation and set it on the table between them. "I'm getting married," They stared at the invitation like it was a bomb that might explode. 3 weeks from Saturday, I continued. Same venue, same time as my original wedding. I know it's short notice, but when you know, right? David picked up the invitation with shaking hands. I watched his face change as he read it, watched the confusion turn to shock, turn to something that looked like horror. Robert Richardson, he said slowly. Isn't that Cassie's dad? I finished helpfully. My fiancé. Well, one of them was my fiancé. The other one was just a placeholder until I found someone who actually wanted to be with me. Cassie made this sound like a wounded animal. Elena, you can't marry my father. Actually, I can. I checked with the state of New York, and there's nothing preventing me from marrying your father, especially since I'm no longer engaged to anyone else. I looked pointedly at David. Funny how that worked out. This is insane, David said, standing up so fast his chair scraped against the floor. You're doing this to get back at us. I'm doing this because your fiancé's father is an incredible man who knows how to treat a woman right. The fact that it's going to make your lives complicated is just a happy coincidence. Elena, please, Cassie said, and she was actually crying now. I know you're hurt, but this is crazy. You can't marry my dad just to spite me. I'm not marrying him to spite you, I said calmly. I'm marrying him because I love him. Because he's kind and funny and smart, and he makes me feel like I'm worth more than just settling for. Because he brings me flowers and makes me laugh and fucks me like I'm the most beautiful woman in the world. Cassie flinched like I'd slapped her. But you're right about one thing, I continued. I am hurt. I'm hurt that my best friend since middle school spent months systematically destroying my relationship so she could steal my fiancé. I'm hurt that the man I planned to spend my life with was apparently just killing time until something better came along. I'm hurt that you both looked me in the eye and lied to me for God knows how long while you planned my replacement. I picked up the invitation and slid it closer to Cassie. But I'm not hurt anymore. I'm happy. Happier than I've ever been. And in 3 weeks, I'm going to marry the most wonderful man I've ever met, and you're going to have to call me Mom. The silence that followed was absolutely beautiful. They sat there staring at me like I was a stranger, which I guess I was. Because the Elena they'd known, comfortable, predictable Elena who took shit lying down, was gone. In her place was someone who'd learned that the best revenge isn't getting mad. It's getting even, and then getting everything you ever wanted. I should go, I said, standing up. I have a wedding to plan. Oh, and Cassie? Your dad's really excited to walk me down the aisle. He says it's going to be the happiest day of his life. I walked out of that coffee shop feeling like I could fly. Because I'd just detonated a nuclear bomb in the middle of their perfect little love story, and the fallout was going to be spectacular. My phone started ringing before I even got to my car. David, then Cassie, then David again. I let them all go to voicemail. I had more important things to do. Like calling Robert to tell him how perfectly the first phase of our plan had gone. How did they take it? He asked when I got him on the phone. Exactly like we hoped. Cassie's in full panic mode, David looks like he's seen a ghost, and I'm pretty sure they're both going to spend the next 3 weeks trying to figure out how to stop us. Good, Robert said, and I could hear the satisfaction in his voice. Because I just got off the phone with my lawyer. Everything's set. The prenup protects both of us, and I've scheduled a meeting with Cassie for tomorrow to discuss her recent life choices. You're really going to confront her? I'm going to give her the chance to explain herself. And then I'm going to tell her that actions have consequences, and that she's about to learn what those consequences look like. I smiled, feeling that familiar warmth spread through my chest. The same warmth I'd been feeling for weeks whenever Robert proved that he was exactly the kind of man I'd thought he was. Strong, decisive, loyal to the people who deserved his loyalty. I love you, I said, and meant it completely. I love you too. And Elena? Thank you. For what? For giving me the chance to be the man I want to be. For showing me what it feels like to be chosen first. For reminding me that sometimes the best things come from the worst situations. I hung up the phone and drove home to my apartment, where my wedding dress was hanging in the closet, waiting for its second chance. In 3 weeks, I was going to walk down the aisle toward a man who loved me, surrounded by people who cared about me, wearing a dress that made me feel like a queen. And Cassie was going to have to watch the whole thing knowing that she'd created her own worst nightmare. It was going to be perfect. The next 2 weeks were a blur of final preparations, family phone calls, and watching David and Cassie's increasingly desperate attempts to reach me. They left voicemails, sent texts, even showed up at my apartment building. I ignored all of it. I was too busy being happy. Robert and I spent those weeks getting to know each other even better, making plans for our future, and falling deeper in love. We talked about everything, our hopes, our fears, our dreams for what came next. And with every conversation, I became more certain that this wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about finding the person I was supposed to be with all along. 2 days before the wedding, Cassie tried one last desperate move. She showed up at Robert's house while I was there, demanding to speak to him alone. I answered the door. "Hello, daughter," I said sweetly. "How nice to see you." The look on her face was everything I'd hoped for and more. "I need to talk to my father," she said, trying to push past me. "Of course you do, but he's busy right now. We're having a romantic dinner before our wedding weekend. You understand." "Elena, please. This has gone far enough. You've made your point." "What point is that?" "That you're angry. That you want to hurt me. I get it. But you can't actually go through with this." I stepped aside and led her into the house, where Robert was waiting in the living room. He looked at his daughter with an expression I'd never seen before, disappointment mixed with something that might have been disgust. "Hello, Cassie," he said quietly. "Dad, you have to stop this. You have to see that she's using you to get back at me." "Am I?" Robert asked, looking at me with genuine curiosity. "Are you using me, Elena?" I considered the question seriously. "I don't think so. Are you using me to get back at your ex-wife for cheating on you?" "No," he said. "I'm marrying you because I love you. And I'm marrying you because I love you too. The fact that it's going to make Cassie's life uncomfortable is just a bonus." Cassie looked back and forth between us like we were speaking a foreign language. "This is insane," she said finally. "You can't be serious about this." "We're completely serious," Robert said. "And frankly, I'm proud of Elena for not letting you destroy her life without consequences. What you did to her was cruel and selfish, and you're going to have to live with the results." "But she's going to be my stepmother." "Yes," I said cheerfully. "And you're going to be my stepdaughter. Won't that be fun?" Cassie started crying then, these big, ugly sobs that might have made me feel sorry for her if I hadn't spent the last 2 months putting my life back together after she'd destroyed it. "I never meant for this to happen," she said between sobs. "I never meant to hurt you." "But you did," I said simply. "You hurt me in the worst way possible. And now you get to live with the consequences." She looked at her father one last time, searching for some sign that he might change his mind. But Robert's expression was stone cold. "I suggest you figure out how to be happy for us," he said. "Because we're getting married tomorrow, and this is the family you're going to have to deal with for the rest of your life." After she left, Robert and I sat in comfortable silence for a while, processing what had just happened. "Do you think she'll come to the wedding?" I asked. "I don't know, but it doesn't matter. The people who matter will be there." He was right. The people who mattered, my parents, my real friends, Robert's family and friends, were all going to be there to celebrate with us. And if Cassie couldn't handle that, it was her problem, not ours. That night, I lay in bed thinking about the journey that had brought me here. 6 weeks ago, I'd been a broken woman who'd discovered that her entire life was built on lies. Now I was about to marry a man who loved me completely, who chose me first, who made me feel like I was worth more than I'd ever imagined. The revenge was sweet, but the love was sweeter. Tomorrow, I was going to become Mrs. Robert Richardson, and Cassie was going to have to live with the fact that she'd created her own worst nightmare. I couldn't wait. The morning of my wedding, I woke up in my own apartment for the last time as Elena Martinez. By evening, I'd be Elena Richardson, and Cassie would have to introduce me to people as her stepmother. If that's not poetic justice, I don't know what is. My mom was there by 7 a.m., bustling around with coffee and pastries and this expression of barely contained excitement. She'd been worried about me for weeks after I'd called off the David wedding, but the moment she met Robert, I could see the relief in her eyes. This was what a man in love looked like. This was what I deserved. "You're glowing," she said, helping me into the dress that had been waiting for its second chance. "I haven't seen you this happy in years." She was right. I was radiating happiness in a way that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with the fact that in 3 hours, I was going to marry someone who made me feel like the best version of myself. The venue looked exactly like I dreamed it would, except better. The same flowers, the same elegant setup, but now it all felt right, like it had been waiting for the right groom all along. Robert had arrived early to greet guests, and I could hear laughter from the reception area. Real laughter, not the nervous, forced kind that had been haunting my original wedding planning. My photographer, the same one I'd hired for the David wedding, pulled me aside as I was getting my final touch-ups. "I have to tell you," she said. "I've been doing weddings for 15 years, and I've never seen a bride look this genuinely happy. Whatever happened with that other guy, you definitely made the right choice. If only she knew the whole story." 20 minutes before the ceremony, my dad knocked on the bridal suite door. "There's someone here to see you," he said, and his expression was carefully neutral in that way that meant he was trying not to influence my reaction. Cassie. She was standing in the hallway wearing a black dress that was completely inappropriate for a wedding, her eyes red and swollen. She looked like she'd been crying for weeks, which, let's be honest, she probably had. "I came to apologize," she said without preamble, "and to wish you well." I stared at her for a long moment. This person who'd been my best friend for 15 years and my worst enemy for the last 2 months. And you know what? I felt nothing. Not anger, not satisfaction, not even pity, just nothing. "Okay," I said. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness," she continued, the words tumbling out like she'd practiced them. "I know what I did was unforgivable, but I need you to know that I never meant for it to go this far. I never meant to destroy your life." "You didn't destroy my life," I said calmly. "You destroyed the life I thought I wanted. Turns out the life I actually wanted was much better." She flinched like I'd hit her. "I know you're doing this to hurt me, and I deserve it. But please don't hurt my father to get back at me. He's a good man, and he doesn't deserve to be used as a weapon." And that's when I realized something that surprised me. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't hurt anymore. I was just done. "I'm not using your father," I said. "I love him. Really, genuinely love him. More than I ever loved David, if I'm being honest. What we have is real, and it's good, and it's going to last because it's built on honesty and mutual respect instead of convenience and settling. But you started dating him to get back at me. I started dating him because he's an incredible man who was available. The fact that it makes you uncomfortable is just a bonus." She was crying again, these quiet tears that made her mascara run. "I don't know how to live with this. I don't know how to face you at family dinners and holidays and—" "You'll figure it out," I said, "because you're going to have to. This is your new reality, and you created it, so you get to live with it." The wedding march started playing, and I could hear the guests standing up. My moment had arrived. "I have to go," I said to Cassie. "I have a wedding to attend." "Are you going to invite me to family things?" she asked quietly. I considered this. Probably. Because that's what normal families do, and I want to have a normal family with your father. But don't mistake that for forgiveness. I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it because I love Robert, and he loves you despite everything, and I'm not going to be the kind of wife who makes him choose between his daughter and his happiness. She nodded, wiping her eyes. "Thank you. Don't thank me yet. You haven't lived through your first family dinner where you have to pass the potatoes to your stepmother who used to be your best friend." I walked away from her and toward the music, toward my future, toward a man who was waiting for me at the altar with tears in his eyes and a smile that was pure joy. The ceremony was perfect. Not perfect in the way I'd imagined my wedding would be, but perfect in the way that real life is perfect. Messy and complicated and absolutely right. When Robert saw me walking down the aisle, he started crying, and then I started crying, and by the time we got to the vows, half the audience was crying too. "You saved me," he said in his vows. "You reminded me what it feels like to be chosen first, to be someone's priority, to be loved for who I am instead of who I might become. I promise to choose you first, every day, for the rest of my life." When he slipped the ring on my finger, I felt something click into place. Not just the ring, but my entire life. Like everything that had happened, the betrayal, the heartbreak, the anger, the planning, had been leading to this moment. The reception was a blur of congratulations, dancing, and genuine happiness. David didn't show up, which was probably for the best. Cassie did, lurking in the back like a black-clad specter, but I barely noticed her. I was too busy being happy. 6 months later, I'm sitting in our kitchen, watching him make Sunday morning pancakes while I sort through wedding photos. We look ridiculously happy in every single one, like people who've found exactly what they were looking for. Cassie and David are still together, apparently. They moved across the country after the wedding, which solved the problem of awkward family dinners for everyone involved. She sends Robert birthday cards and calls him on major holidays, and he's polite but distant. The relationship they had before is gone, and we all know it's never coming back. Do I feel guilty about that? Sometimes. But then I remember what she did and how she did it, and I realize that some bridges are meant to be burned. Robert and I are building something real. We're talking about buying a house together, maybe traveling, maybe even having kids if we decide we want them. We're planning a future that's based on actual compatibility instead of just convenience. And here's the thing that surprises me most. I'm not the same person I was before. I'm not comfortable, predictable Elena who takes shit lying down. I'm someone who knows her worth, who demands better, who's willing to fight for what she wants. The revenge taught me that I'm capable of more than I ever imagined. Would I do it again? Absolutely. Not because I enjoyed hurting Cassie, though I won't lie, there was some satisfaction in watching her squirm, but because it led me to Robert. It led me to a love story that's actually worth telling. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about destroying someone else's life. Sometimes it's about building a better life for yourself. And sometimes, if you're really lucky, you get to do both. Welcome to the family, Cassie. Mom's home.